Hey guys, another day and another session. This time, standard location, €2 blinds. I will be in for 300, I guess, and let's see how it goes. But first I want to say thank you for all the likes and all the new subscribers. But if you haven't so far, please subscribe, click the small little red button under my video, and that would help me and the channel a lot to grow. The new goal is 1000 subscribers. I'm about 430 away from this goal and I would like to reach it when I'm back at Vegas. And yeah, small little announcement before we start into the video. I will be in Vegas for the WSOP on this date exactly, and if you're in the area for the WSOP as well, hit me up on YouTube or on Instagram and maybe we can meet up together, have some drinks or play some cards. Would appreciate that. But now let's go into this session, let's go into the video. Have fun, guys. We start the session shortly past 8 and as I said with €300, and it only takes us 10 minutes before we pick up our first playable hand, and it's a premium. Pocket kings in the big blind. Luckily we see some action before us. The under the gun player raises to 7 and 3 player decide to call, and it's on me. Of course I put in a 3-bet here. I choose a sizing of 37. Maybe a little too small since I'm out of position, and of course the under the gun player calls immediately and one more player, the button, calls as well. So we are 3 ways in a massive pot already with pocket kings, and the flop comes queen 10-7 rainbow. Not the very best flop for our hand, but we have an overpair. We should be good here most of the time, and definitely I don't want to check this. I bet 65. Only the under the gun player makes the call and we go to a turn, and the dealer rolls over the 10 of clubs. Puts in a backdoor flush draw, but nothing too exciting. Actually it's a good card for me. It reduces the chances that my opponent has pocket 10s, and it's kinda unlikely to me that he floated the flop with just second pair. That would improve to trips now. I don't even have a pot size bet left behind, and there are a lot of draws available now. I don't want to give a free card. I put my money in happily here and jam for 190. My opponent doesn't think for too long and puts his card into the mug, and we scoop in the first pot of the night. We are only 20 minutes at the table and you can already say this is an action-packed table. A lot of players are deep stacked, at least 200 to 300 big blinds deep. There are a lot of straddled or restraddled pots going on, but unfortunately we don't get in very many interesting spots in the next 1.5 hours. For example, like this one, we see a button straddle to 5 and an under the gun restraddle to 10. I raise to 30 in the hijack with king 10. The button straddle calls. It folds to the under the gun straddler who 3-bets for 100. The button calls, and at the end the under the gun player wins with ace queen on a board of queen jack deuce king ace. Unfortunate circumstances in this hand for us. Another example, I have ace queen on the button. They have 3 limps to me. I make it 15 and 2 player call. We see a flop of king 10-8 rainbow. They check. I see bet small. They fold. Nothing too exciting. In the very next hand after the ace queen hand, we pick up ace 4 of clubs in the cutoff. There is no straddle this time, and we see a limp from the under the gun player before it folds to me, and I raise to 10. The small blind and the under the gun limper decide to call, and we go 3 raise to a flop of 6-5-3 with 1 club. So we flop ourselves an open-ended straight draw, backdoor flush draw. Overall a very good flop for our hand, not so great for our range, but my opponents can't know that. The small blind checks, and to my surprise the under the gun player leads for 12. That seems like a fair price to me and I call, and the small blind player thinks the same and calls as well. So still 3 raise to a turn, and it comes the king of clubs. Very nice card, good for our range and actually for our hand as well. We pick up the nut flush draw to our open-ended straight draw. The small blind checks and the under the gun player leads again for 15 this time. A very small bet. We have a lot of outs and a lot of equity. I could raise here immediately but choose the lower variance route and just call, and so does the small blind. So we are still 3 raise to a river, and it comes a brick, the 8 of hearts. Now I definitely regret that I didn't raise on the turn and may scoop the pot uncontested, but now I can't turn my hand into a bluff. The small blind checks, the under the gun player checks as well, and I reluctantly check back, and the under the gun player wins with an open-handed straight draw on flop and turn with 8-7. That improves to a pair on the river, and we go on to the next one. But before we go into the next hand, I'd like to mention that a lot of players are very deep this evening. More than half the players are at least at 500 to 1000 in their stacks, so I rebuy for 200 and I'm in for 500 now. We go into the next hand with 500 in our stack and I look down at King Queen suited in the cutoff. There is an under the gun straddle to 10, so you maybe get an idea on how big this game is actually playing. The low jack before me limps and I raise to 40. It folds back to the low jack who calls and we are only heads up to a flop of jack 10-6, but all hearts. Unfortunately our hand is in the spade variety, so we only flop an open-ended straight draw on a monotone board. Not so great. My opponent checks and I decide to check back and we see the ace of hearts on the turn. We improve to a straight, but there are 4 hearts on board now. My opponent again decides to check and I don't see a chance to get some value from a weaker hand, so I check back. We see a blank on the turn in form of the 7 of diamonds and my opponent again checks to me. Like on the turn, I don't see a non-flush hand that calls a bet here on the river and that's the reason why I check back. I turn over my hand and we are good versus ace 4 of clubs. Not a very big pot, but glad I take one down. Let's go on to the next one. Only 10 minutes go by before we pick up our next hand and that's an interesting one. We are in the +2 position with 4-5 of hearts. The under the gun player limps and it folds to me and I raise to 10. The low jack behind me immediately free bets to 35. The high jack behind him decides to cold call and now the under the gun limper calls as well. It's back on me and I get a very good price to draw with our hand here, so I stick in 25 more as well and we go 4 ways in a 3-bet pot to a flop of king 5-4 but all clubs. Looks pretty nice to me, but the board is monotone again, which is kind of frightening, but I'm ready to put in some chips. But first, under the gun and I decide to play in flow and check to the low jack aggressor. He c-bets small for 40. The 2 player between us fold and I definitely go for a raise here. I raise to 125. The low jack really goes into the tank for maybe like 1 or 2 minutes and then he goes all in for 331 total. Oh boy. But to make things short, I think this is a clear call. If my opponent flopped a flush, bon chance and well played to him, but I think most likely when he takes this line, he has the ace of clubs, maybe with a king, for top with the nut flush draw, and yeah, after a short time I stick in the money and call and we see a run out. The turn looks clean, it brings the jack of diamonds and the river looks even better because it comes the 4 of spades. So we hit a full house and I immediately turn over my hand and we are good. My opponent doesn't show his hand, but it seemed like my read was correct. He had the ace of clubs, maybe even without a king, and he was just trying to push us around. Never mind, we scooped this big pot and we are back on track.
This is lit.
I include this next hand so you get an idea on how loose and deep this table was. And to be honest, it's new to me to play such a deep stack game with 500 or more big blinds and I'm not so comfortable. In this one we see a cutoff straddle to 10 and the low jack re-straddles to 20. I'm in middle position and the cutoff before me calls. I think here I make a mistake and I limp. The low jack is next to act and he checks his action and we see a flop 3 raise of king 7-7 rainbow. We all agree to check this board. We see an offsuit 10 on the turn which improves us to second pair and I'm feeling pretty confident about our hand. Anyway, I check and my opponents decide to check as well. We see a brick in form of the 5 of diamonds on the river and I decide to go for thin value and bet 25. Only the low jack calls, I turn over my hand and we are good. For the next hand, I have to reactivate a category. The misplay of the day. Here I'm on the button with queen 10 offsuit. There is no straddle this time and it folds to the hijack who raises to 6. I think this hand plays most likely best as a fold or maybe as a 3-bet, but in this situation I decide to call. It folds to the big blind and before we see his action, a quick note to him. He is the loosest player at the table with the biggest stack. He gives a lot of action. To be honest, I think he is just super rich and loves the game and loves to gamble. The perfect player and opponent you want at your table. But it's not so easy to play against him. He puts you in very difficult spots sometimes. So this player 3 bets to 17. A very small 3-bet and the hijack before me calls. That again gives me a very decent price with our hand to call here, even though it's a very marginal one. I feel committed and stick in €11 more. The dealer burns and shows us Queen 8-7 with 2 spades. The big blind c-bets for 30 and only I decide to call. We see a brick on the turn in form of the 3 of diamonds. My opponent is not done betting and increases his bet size to 100 now. Have I mentioned that he puts you in difficult spots sometimes? Since there are so many draws available, I don't think I can fold here. I call again and we go to the last card, which brings the 5 of clubs. So most likely another brick, but again my opponent is not done betting and this time he bets 200. I really start to hate my life right now, but he is one of the few players who is capable of triple barrel bluffing and I don't have blocker cards to the flush and just a few cards for missed straight draws. And since the fact he has some loose tendencies, I stick in the crying call for 200 and get the bad news because my opponent shows us 8-7 offsuit. Unfortunately we lose this massive pot because of our misplay pre. Let's hope we can turn things around again. This hand is a big one again. We are in the hijack with 8-9 of hearts and there's a button straddle to 6. The +2 player raises to 15 and the middle position and low jack before me call. I decide to come along as well and that invites the button player of course and we see a flop 5 ways. The dealer burns and shows us King 10-7 with 2 diamonds. So we flop ourselves an open-ended straight draw, not the best one to be honest, but overall this board looks kinda pretty to me. It checks to the low jack who bets 50. I decide to call because we are very deep and I already hope for an offsuit 6 on the turn. The other 3 players get out of the way and we are only heads up to a turn. The dealer burns again and shows us a beautiful 6 of hearts. So we have the absolute nuts right now and even better, music to our ears, my opponent in the low jack keeps betting for 100. My first intention was to raise, but what do I really represent with this raise? Only the nuts, I guess. And another good point for just calling here is that my opponent could fire another big bet with either a strong mate hand or a bluff that missed on the river. So I really hope for a blank on the river and indeed we get one. The dealer shows us the deuce of spades, the blankest of blanks. My plan seems to be working because my opponent keeps betting and he sizes up to 200 now, leaving himself with only 160 behind. I don't have to Hollywood in this situation, he is basically pot committed, so after a short time I stick in all of my chips, I have him slightly covered and he sighs. But ultimately he decides to call and I turn over my hand and of course we are good. He later told me he flopped a set but he didn't show his cards, so we never know. We scoop in this massive pot and we are back in the green. The misplay of the day, Volume 2. Oh boy, another one? Okay, let's go over the hand. Here I'm in the big blind with pocket 10s. We see a straddle to 8 and the +1 player decides to limp. The middle position player makes it 35 and it folds to me. In this situation I decide just to call. Maybe I'm a little scared because we both have over 1000 euro in our stack and I'm really not used to those stack sizings. So I only call in this spot and that invites the under the gun straddle and the +1 limper. We go 4 ways to a flop of King 8-4. I check and all of my opponents decide to check as well and we see a 3 turn in form of the 7 of spades. Now the +1 player bets 30. The middle position folds and I think calling is fine, that's what I do, and the under gun position folds. We see an offsuit jack on the river and my opponent bets again for 30. You think it's time to finally fold our 10s? Yeah, then you are right, but I had other plans in this situation and I stick in the crying call for 30 and of course we lose to King 9 offsuit. Another mistake pre and after that hand I don't feel like I can play my A game here and I'm ready to rack up my chips. But there's one last hand we go over. As I said, I'm ready to cash out my chips, but then the dealer does something which most of the dealer likes to do. He gives us our last 2 cards. I'm already in the mood for folding this hand, but I look down at Ace King offsuit. There's a straddle on in this hand as well and there's a super tight player who raises to 30. I don't want to just call this hand, so I 3-bet to 80. There's a cold call before it folds to the early position raiser and he calls as well, so we are 3 raised in a massive pot already and the dealer shows us 9-5-3. 3 offsuit. Early position player checks, and I really don't want to put any more money into the pot here. I already see me losing a massive one, and I check back. The player behind us bets for a random amount, which the early position player calls, and I can't fold my hand quick enough and finally cash out my chips for a nice little profit. Let's go into the session update. Okay guys, short session update. It's way too late for me now. I have to go to bed. I was in the game for 500 and cashed out for 900. Kind of a swingy session, but we booked another win. Misplayed some hands for sure, but I will definitely learn from that. If you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe. Would appreciate that a lot. And good night guys. Goodbye. See you in the next one.